Oh boy, it's already time to interview Lucas about cognitive bias.
Hey Jeremy, what's up? How are things going?
Yo, I'm so glad that I got to have you on for this interview. I'm doing really good, actually. I didn't wake up 20 minutes ago. That's not true at all. Before we start this interview, though, I'd like to give a little bit of a disclaimer. Maybe y'all have already noticed, but Lucas and I are very good friends, and he's here to talk about a book that he recently published. If you want to give a bit of an introduction.
Sure. So briefly, I'm writing a series, hopefully, of books focusing on like psychology and kind of personal development, which are like topics very well covered in English, but very little in French. So we just published, and I write the book, and my friend does the marketing. And the first book that we published is on cognitive biases, right? So like how to improve our decision-making processes and overcome these like things that are wired in our brains and make us be completely irrational. So it's pretty short. It's like 100 pages in French with illustrations, etc. But yeah, that's what we're here to talk about, I guess.
Yeah, and I can't wait to dive in. But before we talk about the actual subject matter of the book, would you want to maybe elaborate why you think there's a gap in French literature about these types of subjects?
Sure. So there's kind of a trend around these topics, like in the last few years, especially in the US and the UK, but mainly the US. So on a range of medium, like on Medium, on Twitter, etc., books. It's a very common thing right now. But in France, it's very much catered to like the academic domain. So like very detailed, like hard to understand books, like focusing on studies, etc. And it's not accessible at all. There's only a few books that are accessible to the larger public, to the larger audience, and yeah, so we're trying to make it more popular. And there's also another point. It's that so podcast is a huge thing in the US, right? But not so much in France. And there's incredible conversations and podcasts and contents that just don't appear anywhere else, right? Because it's just in audio form. And we also draw on these sources to make the books.
Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely noticed in the drawings that y'all provide for the book that you just published that they really make the ideas a lot more compact and easy to understand. And I love having something that's quite complicated just visible in front of me so I can go like, okay, I finally get it. There it is.
Yeah. Yeah, because like I mean, I tried to save you guys the trouble of going like through the 300 pages of Kahneman, which is like the best book on decision making, but God, that took me a long time. It took me like 6 months to get through it. So yeah, I was trying to make it more clear. Yeah.
Nice, yeah. And you're talking about the influences that you drew from in order to write this book. Would you want to maybe label some of the best influences or the most important people right now
Sure.
talking about this?
So I guess yeah, in the English sphere then, because I'm sure your listeners are English speaking. So there's the people who like have used these concepts in their lives, like to build up their careers. So like I'd say Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, etc. Warren Buffett especially is like one of the first ones who like pointed out mental model as a thing. But if you're interested in the topic, the best way to learn about it is to like look at people who have studied them. So I mean like we've made summaries of all these interesting people.
Hmm?
So there's if I've got okay like three recommendations, I'd say um Farnham Street. So it's an ex like intelligence officer of like the Canadian Secret Service, whatever, who like does a blog on mental models, etc. There's Tim Ferriss, a guy who does incredible interviews of a range of people, and he's very interested in mental models, etc. as well. And probably the smartest person, like the clearest thinker I can think of, is called Naval Ravikant. He doesn't mention the term mental models often, but he's just an incredibly articulate guy. Like when he speaks, he doesn't say a single like like it feels like he's like reading off a script, and it's absolutely perfect. And he's got crystal clear vision on very key aspects of your life, like including like building wealth and like being having like a sustainable life, like in our current capitalist society, and like more generally just being happy, like your lifestyle, etc. So yeah, so
One
Farnham
word that
Street,
comes
Tim Ferriss, Neville Rackham. Sorry.
sure, no, one word that comes up a lot when you're talking about these people as mental models, would you want to maybe give a quick explanation of what that is?
Sure. Um, it's nothing. It's not sorcery. It's basically just thinking of the key concepts that you've encountered in life as like this model that applies to different areas. So like there's many like concepts that you learn in physics and finance, etc., that apply to many different areas. I can give you examples if you want. And the idea is to like build a net of these models that like connect to each other. You can also think of it as like a toolkit, which you like progressively like reinforce, etc. And that can allow you to like tackle almost any problem in your life, like any challenge, etc., any situation, by like drawing on these, linking them together, because they're very like um, complementary,
Hmm.
and they come from a range of backgrounds, and it's a really cool way to think about learning. It's more motivating than just like reading a book and being like, oh, this very detailed structure of whatever we're talking about.
Yeah, this reminds me a lot of, I'm sure a lot of people that study English will be familiar with the term intertextuality, where you view a
Mm,
text not in isolation, but as part of not only the culture that it comes from, but all the other texts that might have influenced it and connects with it. Would you
exactly.
maybe want to give an example of a way that mental models help connect different ideas?
Right. I'll show you like one example which is really strong for me, and I feel like is almost has become like a driving principle for me, and is like a thing that draws from finance. At the beginning, it's called compound interest, and it's a concept that comes from finance and just from the idea that okay, I place money in stocks or bonds or whatever. Because of interest, it's going to grow. It's going to be like it's going to go from 1,000 to 1,100 to like by the next year. In like 10 years, it's going to be like 6,000. Then in 20 years, it's going to be I don't know 10,000, etc. So it just grows exponentially. Like it's not this linear relationship. It's like, and we aren't used to thinking like that. And it gets really interesting when you're not only looking at wealth, but like looking at just your life in general. So like the knowledge you acquire today will be useful probably for your whole life. And the relationships you create nowadays will just compound. So grow on each other, there's connections that can be drawn, etc. And thinking long term and in this idea of compound interest and consistently putting in the work, the connections, trying to learning interesting stuff is an incredibly powerful way to lead your life, I think.
Oh, yeah, that's a really great example. And I think that it also connects with another idea, which is seeking out new experiences whilst never
Mm.
forgetting the ones that you've already learned. Is there something that while writing this book, you were like, oh, what if I used my previous experience to try something new?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess so. In the beginning, this writing this book was both an occasion for me to so I was already interested in the topic, so to write about them and like to ingrain them better into my brain, but also to learn a new skill. So like instead of hiring a person like to do all the designs, I was like, sure, I'll try to learn a new skill. And like I've seen in the past that design is really useful, like being able to like present stuff in a cool way, etc. So like I tried to enter this new experience of like doing design myself. So I
Hmm.
took like a small class and online. It's so easy, by the way. It's really useful. Like Adobe Illustrator and all that. It's you can do it in I don't know a month. And yeah, so that's an experience I really grew from because now I can actually do cool designs for a range of stuff. And I feel like actually that's a concept also I thought about, a lot about recently. It's that when you manage to make stuff in your life, like the work you're doing, connect to areas. So
Mhm.
like this is like my interests and also bringing value to others and also learning a new skill. It's just so much more powerful because the thing you're doing at one moment has three uses at the same time. So I really like that. Yeah. So I really like thinking like that.
Nice, yeah. You're bringing up a lot of different elements that come together to basically create knowledge. I remember from your book, there's a specific passage where there's competence that you have based off of your knowledge, and that can sometimes hinder learning a
Mm,
new skill. Would you maybe want to develop on that point?
definitely. So Warren Buffett describes this as kind of your circle of competence. And
just for those who
it's
aren't super into capitalism,
yeah.
who's Warren Buffett exactly?
So so I mean, look him up. You're gonna like the guy. Like he's just like right now he's like an old guy like who like eats McDonald's and drinks Coke every single day. Like he's a fun guy, but basically he's one of the most successful investors of ever, basically on the financial markets, and he's one of the wealthiest men alive. And he achieved
He
that through
drinks Coke a lot, yeah.
yeah. And he achieved that through very sound decision making. What you think you're good at, right? And it's really, really important to be very conscious of what you're good at and not overestimate the range of that circle of competence. Because if you overestimate that range, you might put yourself into situations where like you're like, oh yeah, I've seen this before, oh yeah, and I know how to do this, etc. And you'll like just bring up a solution like this and be completely wrong because you think you're in your circle of competence, but you're not. Um, and so yeah, Warren Buffett is like, and he insists very much upon the idea of being able, like the most important thing is not having like a very wide circle, is being able to very precisely draw what your circle is, the range of your circle, and then slowly expanding that very carefully to other areas and learning new skills, but
Hmm.
very thoughtfully.
Yeah, nice. I think that's a great description. There's something else in that description that I thought was really interesting, which was the idea that the circles are completely dictated by who is drawing them. So my circle for a certain skill would be very different
Mm,
from someone else, even though we're doing the same task. Like a chef that's trying a new recipe will have to look at his, well, I mean, this is the exact example in your book, but yeah, a
mm,
chef that's trying to do a new recipe is going to approach it knowing that his like very basic ideas are mastered, whereas I'm going to try a new recipe and I will have zero competence from the get-go. And so our circles will be very different. Um,
yeah.
there's also a great quote. Sorry, do you want to say something about that?
No, no, I was just gonna say that, yeah, and exactly in that example, if you storm into the kitchen and you're like, oh yeah, I got this, I'm a chef, the end result is not gonna be very successful probably. So it's just all about knowing what exactly you're good at.
Mm. Yeah, and there's also a quote about storytelling that I really like, which,
Mm,
yeah, this also reminds me of a quote about storytelling that I really enjoy, which is, over the years, I've discovered that you actually learn more by saying what you're not than by celebrating what you are. And I think that really comes into
mm,
play with the whole circle model that you're presenting and trying to discover all the things that you're not. But in your case, it's more about the tasks that you're not able to do from the beginning. And there's this idea of incremental advantage and slowly being
mm.
able to get there. How would you maybe develop that in a much smarter way?
No, yeah, I think that's a really cool quote. Did you happen to know by whom it is, or?
Yeah, I actually have the book right here. It's from a book called Storytelling on Steroids. It's
Oh,
a
very
really
cool.
great book about how media has influenced storytelling and how you can see capitalism embracing storytelling and changing its nature.
There's a lot to say about that, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few concepts which come around to that in the book. But yeah, so on wow, on what? Oh yeah, incremental change, incremental improvements. Um, I think that's a really key thing that people, a lot of people sadly might not view as this, but like when you're learning a skill, you're not gonna just from one day to the next become extremely good at it. And focusing on like incremental change and like setting yourself like small goals, like small achievable goals, like to break down the broader goal of like, okay, I want to play the guitar, I want to like write a book, etc. Is much more achievable and much more rewarding, right? And it's kind of tempting to look at like if you zoom in like to a graph like you going like this, like kind of like a seesaw but still going up, and like you're zooming and you're like, oh okay, today I sucked, etc. And
Mm,
trying to think about just, okay, today maybe wasn't amazing, but like the next 2 days will be better, the next week will be better, etc. And seeing like the longer term, but with small achievable goals is a cool way of like of improving. And I feel like, I mean, we all at some to some degree are driven by like growing and learning, etc. and finding the way to like motivate also ourselves to do that on like a regular basis and like in a motivating way is really powerful as well.
Great.
And confronting yourself to new experiences is really key, is a really key part of it for me.
Because you're confronting yourself because you're figuring out the lack of skill that you have that you need to make up for when trying out a new skill. But would you also say
Hmm.
you're confronting yourself the moment you try something new by wondering, why do I feel like I need to do something new? Like you were interested
Mm.
in design, you confronted the idea of either getting someone that could do it for you or fulfilling that role for yourself. And eventually now you can become a lot more versatile with design. You can do it in many different aspects. And I feel like that's a different type of confrontation. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Right. No, I feel like that's, yeah, it's not just only about the skill you learn and like it's just being like, okay, I want to learn this, like to like ticking boxes or whatever, right? I feel like, yeah, there's a lot about, I mean, I'll like link this to like the thing I'm wearing actually. I'm not sure if it's reversed maybe from
Yeah,
like
it's reversed,
the
but
video. Okay, so it says seek discomfort. Um and I think that there's a lot of truth to that in the sense that you don't really see who you are until you confront yourself to situations in which you aren't 100% comfortable. So it's not only about like mastering a new area, but it's also like about putting yourself in situations where you gotta be ready to accept that you're not proficient in this and learn from people and seek discomfort and be like and be able to accept it and grow from it. Um,
yeah, great.
and yeah, I think, yeah, learning a skill has many different aspects to it, and one of them is, yeah, that discomfort.
Wow, yeah. And what I really like about your book, as you said from the beginning, is that it's able to kind of leave the academic sphere. Would you see
Mm,
your book as being something that anyone from a Wall Street investor to someone trying to play the guitar could read and get into?
that's really the goal, hopefully. And honestly, those Wall Street investors, I think, have already a lot to do with, and I'm not. It's not the main people I'm trying to
Hmm.
write to,
Okay.
and I actually really hope that it's accessible enough that these concepts can make a real change in people's lives just on a day-to-day basis. Like even for myself, there's quite a few concepts that I actually apply regularly. If you want, I can give you like an
Yeah,
example,
absolutely.
which I think is really crucial in today's society. It's a very common one we're probably all familiar with. It's confirmation bias basically, and it's
Mm.
very linked to the term of a filter bubble, right? So
If you want to
confirmation
just
bias is
define the
the
term real quick, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So confirmation bias is the idea of I have a thought, I have an idea about a concept, about a situation, etc., and I'm going to seek out information that specifically confirms what I think, instead of seeking out information that confronts it, that challenges it. And the thing is, with the social media and internet, etc., and the search engines, you're very often gonna search more and more information that confirms what you do, and like they encourage you to do it. Like I can literally do the same search, like on the topic, like on food. Okay, are eggs good for you? It's gonna tell me yes. How bad are eggs for you? It's gonna tell me they're really, really bad. Like it's just it can confirm what you want to find exactly. And the problem is that when it applies to eggs, okay, it's not gonna change your life, or maybe it is if you eat like 15,000 eggs a day. But when it comes to like political sub like and societal topics, that's a very big problem because when you look at social media, people are more and more polarized as a result. Like they're pushed information that confirms them into their entrenched views about like the specific candidate, the specific party, and then their view of the opponents. And it becomes much more like confrontational.
Mm.
So trying to overcome that confirmation bias and like popping that filter bubble and getting out of it is something that's useful for all of us and really would improve the state of our democracies, which are
And in
in a
your
bit of a
book, you
crisis, I
tackle
think.
the ways to kind of go against confirmation bias. Would you maybe want to give a couple of secrets to the audience?
Right. Um, right. So I mean, the biggest one is basically seeking out information that challenges what you think. And adjoins to that, being open when you come across such information to reading it or like listening to someone who has like a different opinion from yours, like not being okay, I got to convince them, I got to prove my point is right, etc., but being open to hearing what they think and understanding their point of view. um, and it's crazy that nowadays you have to seek that out yourself, as
Mm,
opposed to before when you would more naturally come across opposing views. But you can so easily get stuck into your small circle. So like trying to, I don't know, for example, if you're on social media, following people you maybe don't agree with, and seeing what they say, what they preach, instead of like seeing it relayed by an intermediary, like a newspaper or something, or like
mm.
a hearsay, you know? So yeah, seeking out those diverging views, I feel like is a good way of overcoming confirmation bias.
Yeah, that's great. There's also another bias that I feel really changes the way that we view things, which is observation bias. The fact that once you start noticing something, you start noticing it a lot more. Would you maybe
Mm,
see that as playing into confirmation bias, where you're looking into things that already help you agree with your opinion, and once you find those, you start only seeing those. So, for example,
yeah.
I know there's within the left this idea of class essentialism. So, the idea that every single struggle can be resumed into a class struggle, which often limits people's perspectives. And when someone comes up to them and talks about a struggle that might not be inherently class related, they'll
Mm.
be very unsatisfied by the response of, oh no, it's totally about class. So would you maybe talk about how observation bias plays into confirmation bias?
Yeah, I think that's a very good example. I think that's very true, and what it shows you is how wired this is in our brains, kind of. It's not just that society works like this, it's that there are a lot of like cognitive things we don't understand yet, but it plays into, yeah, several different areas of your life. So like if you're like we're basically we're pattern identifying machines. That's
Hmm.
how we developed. And so if I take like, yeah, that's a very good like example applied to society. If I take like a more just day-to-day example, like I don't know, you'll listen to a song and then you'll like see the artist, like you'll notice the artist is like on the newspaper or whatever in like the corner of the street. Like your brain just like makes connections and you're like, wow, that's incredible. That's such a coincidence. But it
Yeah.
happens all the time, and it could literally happen. Like you could draw coincidences between everything that happens in your life. But it's, as you say, it's observation bias. Like you see something and you're like, oh yeah, I've seen this before, and like you start making these links
Hmm.
and these patterns, and like constructing these justifications, these stories in your brain that you just tend to reinforce. And yeah, so observation bias and confirmation bias are very linked in that sense, I feel like.
Nice. Yeah. Is there another bias that you might want to talk about from your book?
Well, this one is so important. I've already kind of talked about it, but I feel like it's so crucial that
Mm-hmm.
I really should mention it again. It's just short-term bias. Basically,
Mm.
we're really wired for instant gratification, so small
Oh.
rewards. I'll give you an example of how this is not only the case for humans, but for like mice actually,
Sure.
and how social media plays on this. But basically, the whole idea is that it's much more useful for you to think in the long term rather than the short term. So the example is about instant gratification. So they had this experiment where they had mice and they had this lever that the mice could press on.
I heard about this.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
you heard that? Okay.
The cocaine
It's
lever or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's insane. So like when they press the lever and the food came to them with like a small bit of cocaine or whatever, they just pressed it when they were hungry, right? When there was like cause effect. Then they changed the experiment and they were like, okay, we're gonna mix it so that when they press it, it's random. It could come, it could not come. The mice ended up pressing the thing so many times because they were like, they didn't really know what was gonna happen. Like they were so
Oh.
gratified by like the food coming, etc., and they just ate it that they died from it. So like they were just so addicted to that sentiment of not knowing exactly what's gonna happen and just being gratified by it, that because it wasn't predictable, that they just went right into it. And that's pretty much what social media does to your brain. All the notifications does that to your brain. You're like, I'm not sure how many I'm going to get. I get this notification, I got a
Mm.
like on my picture, etc. And
Just
this
like
instant
unlocking your phone
gratification.
is a lottery of, am I getting a message, right? Like,
Exactly,
yeah.
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's like a lottery. Yeah. And so this instant gratification plays into so many areas in our lives. So it's not only social media, but like, okay, instead of like going out and working out, because it's not a thing I see directly the impact of, um, I'm gonna like just enjoy spending time on Facebook or whatever. Like we're just so wired to like think in the very short term and like the instant result we get out of it, or like maybe we might or we might not, but like it's just like
Mm.
we're short term focused, right? Whereas thinking in the long term, even if it's much harder, often drives much better results.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great bias to definitely pinpoint. Even though you did talk about it before, it's really interesting and definitely worth considering how our lives are fulfilled by short-term gratification, but seeking out things that in the long term will benefit us much more can really shape our world into something way
Mm,
better. And I will say the experiment you brought up, I've never heard of the lottery variant, but I did hear about a variant where the mice was placed in a really comfortable, because the original one, he was just in like a cage with a lever for water and a lever for cocaine water, and ended up killing himself by taking a bunch of cocaine. And then they tried to place it in an environment with lots of other mice, like a mouse park or something. And apparently they were much more willing to go for the water. Now, I've heard that the variant I'm talking about right now is quite controversial because it's very difficult to replicate that result. But would you
mm.
still say, for humans at least, the societal context that we're in, the people that we're surrounded by, the amount of joy that we have in our lives can play a very big factor into considering long-term goals?
Yeah, definitely. Um, so we often say that we're the blend of the five people we spend most of our time with, right? That's a very common psychology saying, etc. And surrounding yourself with people who try to push you towards this growth mindset and trying to think long term and learning new stuff and challenging yourself to new experiences instead of going to the same bar every week, doing the same stuff every single time, etc. I think is a very cool way to live your life. And it doesn't mean that you can't like go to the movies every Saturday. It's just that on top of that, okay, well you'll like set you guys this goal. Okay, you learned the piano, I learned the guitar this year, you know? So yeah, getting a good environment is definitely a huge factor for that. It's
Mm,
a big help.
yeah, that's great. So something that I've been really working on is playing the flute. I really enjoy it,
Hmm.
and I've remembered a lot of things from my amazing drum teacher who always stopped me from going too fast and really just going back to the basics over and over again, doing it slower,
Yeah.
making sure I understand it, get that muscle memory into it, and now I'm trying to apply that to my flute playing. But would you see this as a skill that actually transcends music, but also goes into other fields?
Well, just the action of and the discipline of learning that skill, yeah, definitely transcends to other areas, right? I mean, learning the flute and learning an instrument is tough. It's unrewarding. Like we were saying before, like there's you can not see progress for like a day and like see more. It's not this like very clear relationship where like it just goes like this. Like you have like plateaus, sometimes it goes like this, sometimes down, etc. So yeah, I feel like you learning to yeah push yourself through that and
Mm.
staying through with it is very powerful.
And I really like the way that you visualize it too, with this graph that doesn't necessarily always go upwards, but actually has some dip sometimes. And I think that plays into
Mm,
the short-term gratification bias you were talking about, where if you only view a small moment that wasn't gratifying, you're not going to understand the progress that you've done. And you brought up another point, which is plateaus. How would you say plateaus affect productivity? And is there a way to view plateaus in a bigger picture? Plateaus, by the way,
right.
is
So
a fancy word for saying you're not progressing, you're just staying at a stable rate, and then eventually you might go to a next plateau. Is that correct?
yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's pretty much it. So like there's some areas, yeah, when you music is one of them when you can kind of think of that, it's that you don't see progress like this, you feel like you're not progressing, but you are. But it's the concrete steps like, oh, I learned this new piece that make you think, okay, I progress in the next level, and that's the very rewarding part. The whole learning the actual skill is don't feel like you're making progress. And being able to see the longer term, yeah, is really key to overcoming those plateaus. And I'm sure there's areas I could come up with that you actually plateau going almost you feel like you're going down because like you're investing so much time and effort into the thing and it's not rewarding until then you unlock this thing.
Mm.
So it's yeah, it's again and it's very much a long-term focus thing, but yeah,
And
it
is
can be
there a
very
point
frustrating.
where a plateau can actually be so unrewarding that it's not even worth it to transcend it, where you're constantly going down and you're never going to, and you feel like you're never going to improve, and your time could be spent
Mm.
doing something else? Is there a moment that you would kind of define as you can give up? I'm not asking personally at all. No, I don't. I
No, 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 no. No, no, no.
don't.
No, no, no. No, I'm just thinking because so that and that is actually like another bias link to that. It's called sunk cost. So
Mm,
sunk cost is the idea that when you spend, I don't know, 100 hours onto something, or like it's often applied to companies, like you've sunk 100 million into a product, you're like, okay, no, I'm not letting this down. Like it's gonna feel like a huge failure. You tend to like categorize it as like this thing. If I let it down, I have wasted all this time. It's not. If you at some point during an effort, the project realize that it's not gonna end up being what you wanted it to be, it's just not viable. Yeah, stop it. It's really hard to do, but
mm,
definitely, yeah, it's hard to judge though. So yeah, that's why I think that like looking at people who've done comparable stuff is a good way to try to gauge
oh
if
yeah,
if
yeah.
it's if it's actually doable and if you're stuck on a plateau or if you're actually just going down and it's not going to improve. But
Wow, that's a really
but yeah,
great point, because not only can I compare myself to other people doing the same thing to see how my progress is, but I can also view giving up not as wasting my time, but then exactly what your book is about, translating my skills into something else. So all of those
yeah,
hours that maybe didn't go into this specific skill can now be used, and the discipline that I got from it can now be used for something else. Yeah, that's
yeah,
an
and
amazing point, honestly.
that makes me think about yeah what I was saying before. Like when you work on a project that's got like you're learning three things or like you're bringing value, you're learning two different things at the same time. If it doesn't work out, you still learn so much, and even if the bringing value part doesn't work out, yeah, that's it. I never thought about it like that, but yeah, thinking talking to you about it, yeah, makes sense.
Awesome. Wow. Well, what a great point to end it on, where I look super smart.
Yeah.
But before we end the interview, a really important question: where can I buy your book?
Well, yeah, for now it's available on Amazon, so it should be available on most Amazons because there's like one per country. So there's two versions. There's a paper version, paperback, and the ebook. And it's $5 for the ebook and $10 for the paperback.
Nice,
It's
nice.
pretty short. It's a pretty short book. It's like 100 pages with illustrations, and the goal is that you're able to come back to it quite often.
Yeah, I read
Um,
it, at least the parts that you showed to me, and I thought it was incredibly easy to read, but also super fascinating. It constantly made me rethink the way I saw my own skill learning. I highly recommend it.
cheers.
Thank you so much
If I have
for joining.
Yeah, sorry. If I have just one last
Yeah,
question to ask to your audience, because I'm supposed they're more English speakers.
yeah.
If they can tell us if they have some interest in reading this kind of book, because we might translate it at some point, or
Oh.
even some other countries, that could be really interesting feedback.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this interview. You are the second person I've interviewed so far, and I have to say this was an amazing talk, and I can't wait
Cheers.
to see the rest of the series.
Thank you so much.
Whoa, man. What if it was all a dream?